Wonderful to see you all. I want to welcome you to this celebration. We bring this combination of sadness with the loss of Chuck, but with celebration for the remarkable life that he lived. And as I look around, he touched a lot of people in a lot of different places. I see people from Washington, all over Latin America, Ogle, the organization that I feel particularly close to. I see State Department, Brookings, UN perhaps, all over. So I just want to welcome you to this chapter, chapter. Now, there are many versions of Chuck, as there are many versions of all of us. But we are here fundamentally because he touched us in some fundamental way. We're sad because we loved him and he loved us. And by the way, I believe that he knows we're here. So keep that in our hearts as we go through this memorial celebration, because we have a lot of presences, and I think perhaps we have his presence as well. We're sad for the people of El Salvador. We're sad for the people of Honduras and Guatemala and Central America. We're sad for the peacemakers all over the world because of his consequential work on behalf, speaking truth and advocating for human rights and social justice. Now, a couple of weeks before Chuck died, he invited me to lunch. We had lunch together. He took a couple of bites, but at that time, that was all that he could keep down. He wanted to ask me whether I would be willing to join in this celebration of his life. And of course, I said, yes. I was moved and touched and honored. Now, we've known each other for a lot of years. As I say, first, I think when he went to work for Wola. And then at AU, of course, where there are so many faculty colleagues and friends. Then I said, where at AU? The founder's room? No, he responded, the chapel. And I said, I know that place. Been there before. I spent almost 20 years working out of this building. But I think there was something going on that was much deeper. Maybe where there's love, because Chuck was taken away from us far too soon. Being, however, and you'll permit me, in the chapel is an affirmation that as he stood on the door of the divine mystery, perhaps he knew that we really don't sleep, but we are changed. We're transformed. My faith tells me that when we cross that threshold, the perishable puts on imperishability, the mortal immortality. Chuck and I always did hit it off. From the beginning, we realized we had a lot in common, a shared love of Latin America. And he invested his formidable intellect and persuasive powers, always trying to make things better. El Salvador especially had invaded his heart, never to surrender its grip on his soul. Like others before him, he had been profoundly changed by the witness of so many. And I see many of us are profoundly connected to Central America and the suffering and the heartbreak that that region caused us. The 4 nuns in 1980, the 6 Jesuits, and of course, now Saint Romero, known then as Monsignor Romero, and we will soon hear and we can read from Romero's own words. I too am a different person because of his courageous witness. He looked directly in the face of violence and relentlessly preached justice. He did what Chuck did. He looked at the world from the bottom up, from underneath, and saw the hurt and marginalization and pain of those from below, the cost of violence inflicted primarily on the humble of the earth. And he fixed his gaze on trying to do something about it and doing something about it. He had a powerful gaze and on the suffering and struggles of this broken world. The last time I heard him speak was at a discussion around Central America. In his flawless Spanish, he tore away the worn bromides and went to the heart of the lawlessness of the elites in the power. Chuck was brave, and he believed in the power of ideas and experience to change things. We all knew that the disease was wreaking havoc on his body and that he was in pain, but he bore it with grace. And he packed more into his last couple of years than most of us do in a lifetime. He had stuff to do, places to go, more hikes, camping, travel, including to Iceland the week before he died. More savoring friendship and love. And at the top of that list of love are his 3 children, Shayla, David, and Jag, who are here with us this morning. His partner, Sarah, who's also here. Also with us are his sister, Carol, her husband, Bill, and Chuck's other brother, Chris. They're all here. As we honor the power of memory, remembering Chuck, we also remember Chuck's mother, Joanne Myers Call, who died on Sunday, December the 18th, and was at her funeral in Dallas a couple of days ago. So thank you so much for coming. I'm very touched to see so many friends that I haven't seen for a long time. So we're delighted that you've come. We appreciate your being here. And we are now going to hear from several friends whose lives are bound up with it. Now, you all have your program. Each of these people is going to come up without further introduction.
You're a tough act to follow, Joe. I'm very honored to have been asked to speak about Chuck Hall, a man of substance and accomplishment. I was brought up in the Methodist tradition, and speaking here at AU with its Methodist history, I'm going to begin my presentation with a quote. The proper function of man is to live, not to exist. I shall not waste my days in trying to prolong them. I will use my time. Now, I don't know whether Chuck would have recognized his words, which were written by Jack London, since his leisure reading was of another genre, as I discuss later. but I'm sure he would have recalled hearing these words spoken at the end of No Time to Die, the last of the 007 movie, when M was toasting the memory of James Bond. Building on this quote, I want to focus on aspects of Chuck's character that I found both attractive and admirable. I met Chuck at Ogle during 1991. I had moved to Washington in September 1990, when my wife Caroline started a job at the World Bank. I had taken leave from Oxfam, UK after a decade working on Central America. I came here to AU as a visiting scholar in SIS. However, I also needed to meet like-minded activists. I knew about Ogle, not least because Oxfam had funded a Ogle study on the deadly civilian impact of the Nicaraguan conflict. Alex Wilde introduced me to Chuck. I remember that I liked him immediately. But there were pressing language and cultural barriers to overcome. Now, I can trace my family back to Warwickshire, the country of Shakespeare, the county of Shakespeare, with all that the bard means for the King's English. An English quite different from the Texan that Chuck initially spoke to. Chuck's Texan English was full of y'all, howdy, gonna, and reckon, amongst other things. Chuck was constantly reckoning, which confused me initially, since I thought he was counting when he was in the process of thinking. And there was the quirky use of words. While my beverage of choice is a cup of tea, a nice cup of tea, Chuck's beverage of choice was Dr. Pepper. We pulled each other's legs remorselessly and laughed together. After I asked him if his ancestors came from Waco rather than Waco, he declared, "You're a hoot." I remember when Jack, Dash, and Shayla came to visit us in France. After supper on the first evening, we played a game. Caroline, if money was no object, what car would you buy? Oh, a Ford Mustang, convertible. And you, Peter? How many parking spaces on the front yard would we have? Only one, they replied. Well, I don't like to leave my vehicle on the street, so I would buy a tank so I could park on top of Caroline's car. We all collapsed laughing, and the jokey tenor of the visit was set. You're a hoot, Peter. I can't remember, was it you, Jag, or was it you, Dash, who asked me that question? I can't recall who you are. I mean, I see you and you needed to name. I talked to Chuck a lot about El Salvador and what had motivated him to go there. During my time with Oxfam, I had a number of scrapes. I'd learned how to keep calm at moments of physical danger, as well as how to extract myself from difficult situations. What I did not have was the type of courage that Chuck possessed. I could not have sat and slept in a rural community in El Salvador, night after night, tasked as a witness, with only my passport of protection from the predations of a military, only too prepared to kill poor peasants and foreigners alike. I much admired Chuck's single-minded determination and resilience, as well as his sheer guts in confronting danger rather than moving away from it. Chuck was changed by his experience in El Salvador. It focused his keen intelligence. It made him political. It made him aware of the impact of US defense policy on the little people without power and privilege. In short, it shaped his life's work to promote peace building through policy formation, teaching, and writing. As Alex said in an email, it powered his commitment to social justice. I would run from danger. Chuck ran towards it. He became a volunteer fireman after all. Without courage, you can't be a volunteer fireman. And there are other qualities required. You can't be a volunteer fireman if you don't respect the sanctity of human life and possess a deep well of empathy and compassion, as well as a strong sense of community service. Chuck became a family friend. He would come over to the house for meals and to watch election campaigns. He talked to Caroline, my wife, about becoming an academically engaged with policy. He got to know Titus, our oldest son. After Waller, we remained in contact. We shared a lot. We started to run races together, 10Ks, half marathons, 10 milers. The cherry blossom was our favorite race to do in April. When Chuck moved back to DC after he'd finished his studies and got his PhD, we saw a lot more of him. We visited the Shenandoah often. When he was teaching at AU, he would invariably stay at our house in Albemarle Street. We ate a lot of curry together at Masala Art. We talked a lot about his children. He told me how they played soccer, in inverted commas. I don't know how fast that they could run and how hard they studied. Really, he did say that. I mean, I'm not making this up. He was proud of you kids. You know that. We found we liked many of the same authors: John Sanford, Linwood Barclay, and of course Lee Child. We would delve into the plots and discuss the characters. However, when Tom Cruise at 5'7" was cast as Jack Reacher in the first Lee Child film, you know, we moaned like hell because Jack Reacher's 6'6". And as we know, Chuck would really moan when he was in the mood. He would not let things go. So we never went to see Tom Cruise as Jack Reacher. We had basic principles. But we had endless discussions of Amazon Prime's much more appropriate casting of Alan Richardson at 6'4" as Jack Reacher. So it really mattered to us. Our friendship endured after our move back to London in 2013. Another dimension was added when we bought a house in Freies Cavaliers near Carcassonne in the south of France. Chuck visited 5 times. He was a regular visitor. He came by himself. He came with the 3 kids. He came with the 2 boys. It was always great fun to see him, even though he always seemed to arrive with work deadlines and his trademark sigh. You know, remember that? These visits were an opportunity for tough talking. There was no escape from Caroline's persistent encouragement, perhaps even bullying, about Chuck buying his own house. To welcome him, I hid cans of Dr. Pepper in his room, under his pillow, in the shower, in the chest of drawers. No way, man. This is so funny. It got even funnier when I showed him that the Dr. Pepper was stocked in the English food section of the local Carrickfergus. Chuck's last visit to Freies Cavaliers was in September 2021. As with most things in Chuck's life, there was a purpose behind it. Not only was Freies on his post-cancer diagnosis bucket list, but he also wanted us to introduce Sarah to Caroline and me. He wanted us to become friends with Sarah. It was part of his plan. And we are so happy that he made this introduction. We are firm friends and will continue to be firm friends. We'll be firm friends because of the joy and happiness that Sarah brought into Chuck's life in the last 2 years. So thank you, Chuck, for your introduction to such a wonderful person. Thank you. Chuck was determined to fight his cancer. He confronted his dire medical situation with the same tenacity and bravery that had impressed me 30 years earlier. We spoke at length that September 2021, and I understood that my friendship with him was based on a deep respect for his moral and physical valor, manifest this time by his dogged determination to face up to his cancer by living his life to the fullest. The last time I saw Chuck in April 2022, we spent a week together in DC and in the house he purchased in the Chaminade Valley. We talked a lot, had curry, watched the boys play football, not soccer, had coffee with Shader. We took the dog for a walk in the parks where he ran. I also ran the cherry blossom after a 2-year hiatus. I almost didn't start the run, as I was overcome by a sense of deep melancholy, physical and mental. I was not running the race with Chuck. This was the first time in years I hadn't run this race with Chuck. And it finally sank in that I wouldn't run with him again. He was, of course, delighted when I told him I had finished. His face beamed and his eyes gleamed. It was high five all around. This was Chuck's generosity of spirit to embrace the achievements of others. I had hoped to see Chuck in November. However, I got COVID and had to cancel my trip. I was wide awake in bed when Sarah called on the early Sunday morning, to say Chuck had just died. Caroline was awake too. And so was Titus and Oslo, all at the same time. It was no coincidence that we all had a powerful sense of Chuck's spirit visiting us to say au revoir. So I think his presence with Zen with us as I think Chuck's presence is here today. So returning to what Jack London demanded of himself, to live, not to exist. Chuck was a brilliant advocate for peace. He was humble despite his many achievements. He inspired his students to follow this path. He was infuriatingly stubborn at times. He gave love. He was generous, he was positive, he was loyal and dependable. He was serious, but he was also fun. He was a team player and he committed himself over the long term to issues and people he considered important. He also, and this shows also the tenor of man, he became a supporter of Wolverhampton Wanderers Football Club. Like the 2 boys, so up the Wolves. He also had a power, un poder de convocatoria. Caroline and I were sitting in the departure lounge waiting for our flight to come over. And I said to her, you know, it's nearly 10 years since we left Washington, DC. And although I've been back by myself and Caroline had been back by herself, this is the first time we've come back together to Washington. And it's because of Chuck. And we're so happy to be here. So returning again to Jack London, above all, Chuck was a great father because he shared with his kids all the values that guided the way that he lived his life, the important things. So I'm lucky that Chuck was a part of my life for 30 years. He was my Texas brother from another mother. I miss him.
In October, I got a text from Chuck asking me to suggest a song from Central America that could be played as memorial service. And the first one that came to mind was one that I really liked about Oscar Romero. And in a few minutes, you'll hear this song. And it was written right after he was assassinated in 1980. But now I want to share a few passages I found from a homily given by Romero in 1979, a year before he was killed. And this was on the cusp of a brutal, violent civil war. And Romero calls for and imagines what a quote-unquote civilization of love might look like. I think these words are a fitting reflection as we celebrate Chuck's life and as we think about and thank him for his contributions to the world and to each and every one of us. If a civilization of love did not demand justice of people, it would not be a true civilization, nor would it provide a path for right relationships between people. When people try to cloak in alms what is due in justice, or when they try to appear benevolent while social justice is lacking, it is simply a caricature of love. True love, mutual love, begins by demanding what is equitable in relationships. But that is not enough. True love also demands truth. If there is no truth in love, then we have hypocrisy. In another part of the homily, Romero says, the civilization of love condemns absolute divisions and radicalization. I believe that this is the great sickness of our society. We have become polarized. We have become radicalized in two extremes, and those on the extreme right view everything on the left as contemptible. And finally, love is impossible without humility. Forgiveness is impossible without a spirit of service in our hearts. It is impossible to build a civilization of love without a foundation of humble service to our sisters and brothers. We must open our hearts to others and ask them, what do you need and how can I help you? I first met Chuck when he came to the Washington office in Latin America in the summer of 1990, after he'd spent 2 years at Stanford in graduate studies. But perhaps more significantly, as everyone has alluded to, he had spent almost over a year and a half in a community of people displaced by the Civil War in El Salvador, the community of Panchiganama. It wasn't until the past year, however, when I was able to spend time with Chuck over the course of 3 visits in El Salvador, after he was diagnosed with cancer, that it began to dawn on me just how important, how formative, how life-changing that experience had been for him. The next person to speak will be Adilio Carrillo. Adilio was 7 years old, 6 and 7 years old, and knew Chuck very well in those days. Now today, 35 years later, he teaches political science at the Jesuit University in Ogle, and he came up from El Salvador just to be with us. There is a good story though about how they got connected. In 2012, you may remember Chuck had a stint at the State Department. And because of his interest in Central America, they sent him to a Central American Donors Forum in Seattle. And I think maybe the first panel, I may be wrong about that, there was some guy there from Jóvenes contra la Violencia speaking, and he was intrigued by this guy. So he went up and talked to him afterwards and started asking him, do you know this guy, this guy, this guy? And finally they realized they knew each other, and that this was Adilio from the community. But the strength, so that's already serendipitous. But the funny thing is, this was Adilio's first trip ever to the US. Within hours of stepping foot in the US, he meets Chuck. Well, before Adilio left El Salvador, his mother said, oh, you're going to the US, why don't you look up Carlos? So, Adilio, please come forward.
I'm sorry, I don't speak English. Es muy difícil hablar de Carlos, traigo unos apuntes sobre experiencias muy particulares que vivió Carlos en Panchimilán.
It's really hard to talk about Carlos. I did write a few things down and I'm going to share a few experiences that we had in Panchimilán.
Ahora quiero hablarles brevemente de una fase que Chuck vivió en El Salvador. Creo que muy pocos conocen sobre esto.
I want to tell you a little bit about this brief period of time that Carlos spent in El Salvador. Maybe not many of you know much about it.
Conocí a Chuck en 1987. Yo apenas tenía 7 años de edad.
I met him in 1987. I was just 7 years old at the time.
Era un niño que entendía. Sorry. Okay. Entendía muy poco lo que ocurría en mi país.
I was just a child and I understood very little of what was happening in my country.
Pero muchas cosas que ocurrieron en ese sitio me impactaron tanto.
But a lot of things that were happening, of course, had a big impact on me.
Por supuesto, a mí y mi familia, cuando conocimos a Chuck, no entendíamos qué hacía un gringo en ese sitio tan inhóspito, tan difícil.
So when we first met Chuck, my family and I, we were asking ourselves, why is this gringo in a place that's so inhospitable and so difficult?
Le llamábamos Carlos el Gringo.
We call him Carlos, the gringo.
Y esto ocurría porque en ese sitio habían alrededor de 7 personas que se llamaban Carlos.
Because there are about 7 people around and already named Carlos.
Y él asintió que le dijéramos gringo.
And he was okay with us calling him gringo.
En ese sitio vivíamos muchas familias desplazadas por el conflicto armado desde otro departamento.
In that area, there were many of us families who have been displaced by the armed conflict. We had come from another department.
La presencia de Carlos en ese sitio fue muy importante para todos quienes vivíamos ahí. Él se convirtió en una especie de guardia o de ángel para todos. Ahora explico.
Chuck's presence there was very important for all of us. He became kind of a guard, kind of an angel for all of us, and I'll explain that.
Las personas extranjeras, en particular estadounidenses, daban una especie de alto para que los militares no llegaran a agredirnos a los chicos.
Foreigners in the area, especially U.S. citizens, put some brakes on the army so that they wouldn't come and harm us and harm the children in the area.
Pero Carlos no entendía por qué estando en un sitio era odiado por los militares y por los guerrilleros. Los militares porque decían que él defendía a guerrilleros y los guerrilleros manifestaban que era parte de los militares.
But Chuck didn't understand that he was actually hated by both sides. The army was sure he was a guerrilla, and the guerrillas were pretty sure that he had some connection with the army.
Los militares decían con mucha frecuencia que una vez Carlos el Gringo se fuera de ese sitio, iban a matar a toda la población.
We heard that the army said that once Carlos el Gringo left the area, they were going to kill everyone.
Carlos no se iba por eso.
And he didn't leave because of that.
Carlos ayudó a muchas familias en ese sitio a buscar a sus hijos desaparecidos.
Carlos helped people in that area to look for their disappeared children.
Uno de ellos, mi hermano,
One of them was my brother.
él fue capturado por la policía en el 87 y Chuck lo buscó junto a mi madre en hospitales, delegaciones de policía, en los centros militares.
He was captured by the police in 1987, and Chuck went with my mother to look for him. They went to hospitals, they went to police stations, and they went to military outposts.
Mi hermano nunca fue encontrado.
We never did find my brother.
Pero el gesto que Carlos hizo fue muy grande y hasta este momento es muy especial para mi familia.
But what Chuck did was really important for my family, and we still remember it to this day.
Por las tardes, Chuck le gustaba juntarse con todos los niños y jugar al fútbol.
In the afternoons, Chuck liked to get together with all the kids and to play football.
Y para nosotros era un gigante.
He seemed like a giant to us.
No sabíamos fútbol, no sabíamos, jugábamos con un balón, si se le puede llamar balón a eso, era una circunferencia.
So we didn't know much about soccer. We didn't have a soccer ball. You couldn't really call what we used a soccer ball. It did have some sort of.
Carlos construyó su propia casa ahí junto con mi padre, con sus manos, una casa si se puede llamar casa.
Built his own house there along with my father. They built a house for him, if you can call it a house.
El sitio donde vivía Carlos era de plástico, como paredes y como techo lámina.
The walls were made out of plastic and the roof was corrugated tin.
Era solo para no mojarse y protegerse del viento.
It was basically just to protect yourself from the wind and to not get wet in the rain.
Lavaba su propia ropa con sus manos en un río que estaba a 20 minutos de distancia.
He washed his clothes by hand in a river that was about 20 minutes away.
Con frecuencia venía muy molesto del río porque se le caía su ropa y se ensuciaba nuevamente.
He often would come back really upset because his clothes would get away from him and he'd get caught in the mud and they'd be dirty again.
En una ocasión mi madre le preguntó, Carlos, ¿por qué vienes enojado?
One time my mother asked him, Carlos, why are you so mad?
Y dijo, la ropa, hijo de puta, cayó.
He said, that son of a bitch, well, sure it fell.
Mi madre sonrió y dejó que siguiera su ruta con su ropa sucia.
My mother laughed and let him go on with his dirty clothes.
En una ocasión, Chuck fue a San Salvador a hacer una denuncia por maltratos recibidos en ese sitio, Panchimilán.
Once Chuck had to go to San Salvador to put in a complaint about some mistreatment that people had experienced in Panchimilán.
Los militares iban decididos a matar a Chuck.
mistreatment that he had experienced, perhaps. The army was determined to kill Chuck.
Mi madre tuvo que desplazarse a San Salvador a buscar a Chuck para advertirle que no regresara porque lo iban a matar.
My mother had to go to San Salvador to warn him not to come back because they were going to try to kill him.
Carlos no le importó. Regresó y se puso a putear a todos los militares.
Chuck came back, he didn't care, and he started just trash talking all in the hearing.
Nuestras familias se preguntaban por qué un estadounidense, teniéndolo todo, las condiciones elementales para vivir en su país, está en este sitio.
So my family still wondered, why is an American citizen having everything that he needs to get by in life, coming here to live at this place?
Viviendo en condiciones de extrema pobreza, de mucho riesgo,
Living in a situation of extreme poverty, of a whole lot of risk.
nuestra respuesta siempre fue que solo es posible hacer todo eso que hacía Carlos porque tenía mucha compasión por los pobres y necesitados.
And our answer was that it was only possible for Carlos to do this because he had so much compassion for the poor and for the needy.
Esto es el verdadero amor al prójimo.
That is true love of your neighbor.
Desprenderte de todas tus comodidades
Leave behind all of your comforts
para atender a quien más lo necesita.
to care for those who need more.
Esto fue Carlos el Gringo,
That was Carlos el Gringo,
un ángel enviado del cielo para cuidarnos.
he was an angel sent from heaven to take care of us.
Chuck Hall was blessed with an unusual array of gifts: great empathy, a powerful intellect, love of nature, appreciation for good times, readiness for disappointment, an unwavering commitment to his children and friends, and of course, bottomless appreciation for Dr. Pepper, spicy food, tragic crime novels, and the Dallas Cowboys. We've lost a beloved friend, but Shayla, Jag, Dash, Sarah, we know how much harder it is for you. Please know that everyone here today and watching online will be here for you in the coming days, months, and years. Chuck and I first became friends in college. I and most of Chuck's friends were a year behind him in school, and he didn't have a very enjoyable junior year. So he took a year off and did what most of us would do. Got a black belt in karate, earned a real estate license, read up on US policy in Latin America, and took theology classes at the seminary. When he came back to school, he was a much happier person. As graduation neared, he explored ways to get himself to El Salvador, where he felt he could do some good and learn firsthand the realities of the Salvadoran Civil War. Soon he was off to Panchimilán, a settlement of Salvadoran families displaced by the war. Anyone who knew Chuck knows that he always wanted friends and family to share his experiences. Come visit and let's go were two of his favorite phrases, even apparently in the middle of a civil war. He encouraged high school and college friends to come stay with him. A number of us did. As he brought us around the village, it was soon evident that he had become a beloved member of the community, greeting everyone we saw by first name, tickling toddlers, teasing the teens. Though Chuck often told me and others that his American passport made him someone the paramilitaries and military would not want to injure or kill, the reality was that in the fog of war, anything could happen. But Chuck never wavered in his commitment to staying in Panchimilán and helping those around him navigate the challenges they faced. Chuck came back from his year and a half in El Salvador, a changed person. When he left, he was a committed Christian. By the time he returned, he was no longer a believer. He viewed all people and institutions as actors who shared the basic strength and foibles of humanity. While his worldview changed, he remained the same person at heart. He remembered your birthday, sending cards, gifts, regardless of how well you might have remembered his. He invited you to visit or travel with him, called regularly to check in, enjoyed sharing his latest challenges and successes, and took true joy in his family and friends' achievements. He was one of the few people I ever knew who actually shouted, "Woo-hoo!" when you shared a piece of good news with them. There was, acknowledge my age. There was no one who he appreciated more or spoke more about than his children, Shayla, Dash, and Dag. When we weren't together, Chuck and I typically stayed in touch by phone, usually when he was driving home from a soccer game, rhetoric competition, or a golf tournament. He loved describing his kids' great passes, shots, wins. He occasionally worried about yellow cards, but mostly he enjoyed watching Shayla, Jag, and Dash grow and flourish as athletes, students, and young adults. About once a year, Chuck would set aside time to travel with Chris Lilio's Vic Rivera events. We went to New Orleans, Vermont, Fort Myers to watch Winter League Red Sox versus Yankees, Portugal this past summer. We saw lots of great sights, shared fun adventures, but what stands out most in my memory are conversations that stretched late into the night. They were a lot like the ones that we had when we were young in college. Recently, I remember a talk we had right after graduation, as he and I drove his old car, a beige Toyota Corolla, from New Jersey back to his childhood home in Dallas, Texas. The first afternoon of our drive, our conversation turned to what we hoped to be remembered for. Chuck asked me about my goals, I talked about unrealistic things like writing a critically acclaimed novel, a great American novel. Then I asked Chuck how he hoped to be remembered. I just like people to say Chuck was a good person, a good guy. That's it, a good guy, I asked. Don't you think you could aim a little bit higher? He laughed at me. Being remembered as a good guy would be a great thing. May his memory continue to be an inspiration and blessing to all who were.
I have a short reading from this book, Markings by Dag Hammarskjöld. I don't know who or what put the question. I don't know when it was put. I don't even remember answering. But at some moment I did answer yes to someone, something. From that hour, I was certain that existence is meaningful and that therefore my life in self-surrender had a goal. And I chose this reading for a few reasons. First, because it was mercifully short. But it's actually a quote that Jean Colombo, a very close friend of ours for many years in El Salvador, posted on Chuck's Caring Bridge. And I think because it's a quote from someone of a lot of personal courage, and Jean saw a lot of that in Chuck. But I also thought it would be a nice reading so that we could somehow, in spirit, have with us here also a lot of the folks who worked with Chuck for many years at the UN or on peace building issues. So many of them up in New York, where I am, would have loved to have been here, asked for the Zoom link so they could be listening in. Many of them who knew him and from that work are here with us today. I think he was really pleased to be able to have been representing the US on the Secretary General's Peace Building Fund Advisory Group. He said, I don't know how much we do, but we'll just try to help, try to be helpful. People in Lebanon, in Oslo, who co-authored books, had a lot of stories to share, and we're all here with us very much in spirit today. For us, a lot of times he was that insider outsider that you need, that comes in to very serious discussion and is your straight shooter and maybe says the things that you wish you could say. And Chuck was that and played that role for a lot of people in a lot of different institutions. And I'm not sure Chuck himself would have liked that reading all that much. I think he would have thought it was a little bit self-serious. My life has meaning. He would be like, really? Are you sure? I have a voicemail. I have a voicemail on my phone. I don't know what to do. I can't get rid of it. I take it out, but I listened to it quite a lot from a few months ago. And he didn't like to take himself or anybody too seriously. He said, and yes, kids, your dad and I did still use voice. That can laugh at us. But he left the voice, so he was on the road going somewhere. And he said, hey, Madalene, I don't know if you heard, I got cancer, stage 4, they think it's pretty serious, so kind of gotta take my calls. So I'm here talking about the person he was, the things he did, but of course, most of all for me, he is one of my dearest personal friends. And and not the only one here today, you can say I was married in his backyard. Chuck and Tracy's house in Reliance. And I guess I just want to end where almost all of my phone calls with Chuck began. Talking about our kids, how they are, how they're doing. It's always the first update for all of us. We were like most parents. We did a lot more bragging about our kids when they weren't in the room. We did a lot of that. And I was lucky enough to have my daughter born 6 weeks after these two guys here. And first time or whatever touched the ocean was with you guys. First ski slope she was ever on was with you guys. And love doesn't end. So I know my good friend's gonna be with me my whole life. And I know he'll be with you too. Love you very much. This little life. This little
My wife Dominique and I met Chuck and each other about 35 years ago in graduate school. I just wanted to say a few words about Chuck's friendship. What Andy really referenced how loyal he was to his friends. His friendship is a generous, open-ended, constant gift in my life, like I know it was for Dominique and for many of you. And despite his busy life, and regardless of distance, Chuck was always present for a friend. And, you know, I usually also catch him with others, you know, as he's driving, running late, or, you know, speeding. And, you know, we catch up like in a barrage of news. But if he sensed that I had something on my mind, Chuck became very focused. Intensely curious, asked a lot of questions. He wanted to know exactly what was going on. And once he completely understood, he'd always, you know, like sigh and say something in his warmest voice, like, "Ah, my friend, you have really screwed up." Because Chuck's love for a friend is unconditional, not a never lost for the big, but of course, immediately follow with a burst of laughter at his own times. It was a joke he never tired of. From then on in, I knew I could count on all of his empathy, passion, reassurance, encouragement, and all the time I wanted. Former colleagues here, I think I have to tell you, you know, he wasn't going to let anything as inconsequential as a professional deadline distract from comforting a neurotic grad school friend from across the world. But I could also count on the most thoughtful, insightful, grounded advice again anywhere in life. And I marvel at that. Because his advice is like the only thing about Chuck that I could ever describe as measured. I mean, it was like such a touching indicator of his concern for me that he always told me what I should do, never what he did. But finally, I could count on every conversation, regardless of context, you know, every conversation with Chuck being full of laughter. And Chuck's sense of humor was inappropriate. It was well intended, but the intent was mischief, right? And you know, I love him. If you were ever in any like even slightly socially awkward situation with Chuck, you knew he was thinking, I can make this more. Yeah, and then again, that's why he saw his own even tragic illness kind of a gold mine of my wife and I, though, so glad, you know, that he was the best man at our wedding. Also didn't let him make a toast. But I know, like so many of you, you can always miss Chuck. But I feel so grateful to have his love, his friendship, and to have his voice in my head.
Thanks so much for being here today. It's been quite a journey since Chuck was first diagnosed in February of 2020. Last July, he made it clear he didn't want any presents for his birthday. I ignored it, of course, and gave him a book. We've been giving each other books for more than 30 years, so why stop now?
I sat down to write a card and realized it made much more sense to talk about our friendship now while I was alive. Most of us really aren't like Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer. We don't get to show up at our own funeral to hear what others say about us. I want to talk a little bit about the power of friendship. There's not really enough emphasis in our culture on the value and importance of having close friends throughout our lives. I think that real friendship is about being truly seen by another person, someone who gets who you are, where there's little, if any, pretense. I met Chuck when I was working on Capitol Hill. I was responsible then for organizing trips with members of Congress to South America because I was doing oversight on the war on drugs. And I wanted to find the NGOs that were working on these issues. I knew enough to know that I didn't want President Bush's State Department determining our itinerary. So that's how I found Lola, like so many other people, and found Chuck. Initially, we connected on our values, social justice, and how to think about what constitutes meaningful work. Endless conversations about seeking the best venue for our skills, intellect, and politics. We also shared a love of the outdoors, and sometimes those interests collided. Far too many hikes and bike rides were spent debating the merits of working at the White House, the State Department, and in academia. When I think back to the Thanksgiving we hiked the Grand Canyon, I can recall our conversations as much as the grandeur and our snow-covered tent. We were demonstration buddies, the war in Iraq, women's rights, civil rights, but the one that sticks out is after George Floyd was murdered. It was the height of COVID, there were no vaccines yet. A big march was being planned in DC for Black Lives Matter. We agonized, how can we go? How can we not go? In the end, we went, wearing masks, deciding against public transportation, and agreeing to move to the side if it was too crowded. I like to think we were there for each other at key moments in our lives. When I returned from China with my newly adopted daughter, I had a layover in LA. Chuck showed up at the gate with coffee. This was before 9/11. When I broke my ankle, we traded cars because he was the one friend who could drive my stick shift. On election night, a few nights before he died, we were up watching the returns. I was sitting on his hospital bed, laptops open. He was excited and focused on the details. He went to sleep at about 11. I woke up at 2 or 3 and went in to find him wide awake, saying, I was waiting for you. Let's see how it looks. We stayed up most of the night watching the returns. I returned on Saturday when he had taken a turn for the worse. He died at 9:17 that Saturday night. Political junkie that I may be, I'm very proud to say that I was not on my phone. And a few hours later, when we looked, we saw that the Nevada Senate race had been called at 9:17. I like to think he knew. It's an extraordinary testament to Chuck that he was able to sustain so many close friendships over so many years. In the past few weeks, multiple people have said some version of, he was my best friend, or he was like a brother to me. A few days after he died, I sent a text to the friends who'd been there that weekend, thanking them for what we had shared. Vic responded with a line that said it all that I want to share with you. From my end, while I vaguely knew that Chuck had some other special friends in his life, I mainly thought you were really just the people he divided time with between those times with Andy, Chris, and me. But seriously, one of the main things I tell people about the past 18 months, and especially those last few days, was my feeling of awe that Chuck had such close friendships with so many wonderful, caring people. In the 18 months since his diagnosis, Chuck really embraced life fully. He spent as much time as he could with so many of us. He continued to travel and he joined dinner parties even when he really couldn't eat very much. And to Shayla, Dash, and Jag, I want to take a moment to tell you just how proud your dad was of all 3 of you. You meant the world to him. Shayla, your dad and I were having dinner when you called to say that you've gotten into Stanford. I don't know what we planned to talk about that night, but it didn't matter. We talked about you and Stanford. And Dash and Jag, I never have had a conversation with your dad in the past few years that didn't include the highlights from your recent soccer games. I'm so grateful to have been a part of his life. I'll miss him, and I hope to be a part of yours in many years to come.
Charles Chuck T. Paul Presente. Let's go. Now, Chuck crossed that threshold before us. He crossed the finish line ahead of us, and a powerful lamp went out. But I believe for Chuck, dawn has come. And we take consolation in that love that never dies and the dazzling grace that always is. And now we are going to continue this remembrance, celebration of Chuck's life, but we're going to do it in the founders room of the School of International Service, which is just across the quad. So I'm inviting you all to walk across the quad to the School of International Service building. The founders room is at the terrace level, the lower level. So we invite you all to come. There will be more sharing with stories. As you can see, he left us with much. Amen.